I want to pull out for a second, and I want to think about, like, so going into Danielle's classroom, we use, assessments, we use her data, we used, things that we had beforehand to sort of give us a good idea of where our issue with our kids, where do we want to focus our time in the observation, what students did we want to pinpoint or prioritize when we were in the classroom, what trends did we want to look for, all that good stuff. And going to the classroom, we knew three basic things we wanted to look for, and then we were able to find them. How do we like, now having used this process for a core member that's progress known, like what does this make you think about what you would want to do for a core member that's not progress known? So like this afternoon when you go to Main Street and you talk to Asman and them, or maybe even Morgan, or some of our other progress unknown people, like what does this process make you think has to happen for the progress unknown folks to convince them of why all of the data points that we can gather is important? I like that breeze. Don't you like that cross breeze?
I think it's just as simple as, if I know more about exactly what's happening with your students, then you're going to see changes happen at a much faster rate than us, grasping in the dark, trying to figure out, what in general is going on without looking at actual concrete information that's going to really pinpoint, the areas that we really need to focus on. I mean, in a nutshell, for this experience that we've talked about with Danielle, going from looking at her data, going into her classroom, and then talking about it, I mean, for the progress unknown folks, it's just to hammer home the idea that, we've got to know what's happening with your students before we can pull out any, underlying factors or any things that have to change on the teacher level or the student level. I mean, I don't know. It's just it's very, like, clear cut to me. Like, we need to know where your students are, or we're not going to be able to make any type of change in your classroom that's meaningful, or that's really driving towards the goals. I don't know. You can help me clarify those thoughts. But I mean, it's just, I guess it's more on me, really, to say, like, to push my urgency to get them progress down is what this process is really driving at, if that makes sense. To make sure that I have the information so that I can really start having meaningful interactions with them. Because without information about where their students are, my interactions with them are not going to be meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think if this is the way that you're preparing for anybody's classroom from now on, like, before you go into the classroom, you're looking at their data, you're looking at their assessments, you're looking at their vision, and you're pulling together a full picture of, all right, this is what I think are the progress and gaps in this classroom. These are some of the trends I'm starting to see. This is my emerging theory about what I think is happening based on all of the pieces of evidence that I have, including the student achievement data. And, like, this is what I know I'm going to look for when I go into this classroom. Like, we had, these three things I know I'm going to look for. If you start to make that a consistent part of your practice, I think it's gonna create a sense of urgency when you are then approached with a core member you don't have all of the pieces of evidence for. You're like, I know the kind of questions that I want to be able to ask, this core member, but I don't have this piece of evidence to answer that question. Just like we didn't have Danielle's assessment before we went into the classroom, which is why we had to get her math assessment when we got there, and then we were able to look through it. But when we looked through the math assessment, it confirmed the two questions that we had. One was, I don't know if our math assessments are as rigorous as they could or should be. And then two, that finding the answer to that is going to help us to figure out where to start with this rigor question. Well, because we were able to get her assessments, we were able to get that question answered. But for a person that we never got those assessments for, like, those would be the questions that we would have to start with in a conversation with that core member. And similarly, for a person that's progress unknown, the things that we did to prepare for Danielle's classroom, we would have to think about, all right, well, I don't actually know, when we went through Danielle's data and we were trying to figure out who are the students who are struggling or not, we don't really know that without looking at student achievement data. So we would have to ask the core member that. And if the core member doesn't know that information, then we would have to figure out, that would be the point of starting with them, like, look, we actually need to be able to prioritize which students are struggling or not and what things are they struggling on. But I think we at least have a building base of questions that we need to be able to have answered when we go into a classroom now. We need
Right.
to know, students that are struggling or not. What are they struggling on? What trends am I seeing in what students are succeeding in or struggling with? What does that make us think about the way teachers are teaching? What evidence do I have about this teacher's practice that leads me to believe, I need to start here or there?
Right.
I think the data just informs so much of those questions for us. And so I think we need to take that bank of questions to our progress unknown people and explain why we don't have answers for those questions. And
Right.
get them to explain how we're going to get the answers to those questions. And that's where we become progress known.